A behind-the-scenes look at the 2025 NFL Draft with Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell. Don't mind if I do. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Today on the show, we have a very fun one for you. Going to spend most of the show talking to Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes about Donovan Jackson. But before we get into all of that, it's a great conversation. Can't wait to share it with you. The Vikings released their annual behind the scenes look at the draft. And it's become something of an event for me because I think you can read between lines. You can actually learn a little bit about Kwesi there. I don't think you can glean, the Vikings are really careful with what they put out there, right? So I don't think you can glean a lot of huge reports. They're not going to show their draft board. They're not going to show, you're not going to learn, ooh, they wanted this guy instead or anything like that. You're never going to learn what their board was like. But you can learn principles and you can sort of read into some things if you want to try to. For example, the Vikings watching the board fall in the first round, if you wanted to make some guesses, you could say, man, they were locked in on Donovan Jackson for a long time. And I bet that they were. But there was one quote in it that really stuck out to me, which was Kwesi talking about, hey, Cincinnati and Seattle are coming up. This is our real turning point. We'll see what happens with Cincinnati and Seattle, and we'll kind of see how we feel from there. And the fact that they were eyeballing Cincy and Seattle as the points that they were really watching says, okay, so Cincy and Seattle are the teams that are going to take somebody maybe we think we want. Seattle was pretty much locked in on O-line. Everybody kind of knew they were going to take O-line. They needed it really bad. They didn't really do anything about it in free agency. Of course they were going to take O-line, so it's Gray's able. Cincinnati, all the reporting coming out of coming out around draft time about Cincinnati was that they were going to go defense, and indeed they did. They took Shamar Stewart. So I'm not sure if that tells us that they're watching the guard needy teams. So after 17-18, then he says, okay, we should be decently clean until Chargers Packers. So that says we don't really care what happens between Seahawks and then Buccaneers, Broncos, Steelers. Didn't really care what happened there. Well, that's a couple of teams that we're going to do, they people were talking about them all taking running backs and stuff. So that kind of makes sense. But they were actually pretty worried that Donovan Jackson would go to the Packers. That was what they didn't want to happen. So here's the theory that I'm coming up with off of all of this. And maybe it's coming out of my own brain too. So I could be grafting my own thing off onto this. I'll be transparent about that. But I think the Vikings wanted one of Gray Zabel and Donovan Jackson. And they kind of knew that, one of those guys is going to get snapped up by Seattle. And then the worry is that Green Bay takes the other guy. So I guess that soundbite about we're worried that the Packers are going to take Donovan probably happens between picks 18 and 23, where, okay, Zabel's off the board. Now we got to just sit and wait and see if Donovan Jackson falls to us. But if you remember, the pick went in really, really fast, which is kind of funny. I mean, we thought that a trade down was I thought going into the whole draft that a trade down was the most likely thing to happen. And they didn't even consider it. They didn't even have, they were so in on Donovan Jackson. They ran up to the podium. The pick was in right away. They didn't even use their clock, which actually is, I would criticize. I think that's kind of an oversight, right? Use your 15 minutes. But either way, it's kind of weak criticism because that was their guy. They got their guy. And it's important context to understand, when you talk about the decision to take Donovan Jackson instead of trading down. They didn't even consider the off. I mean, I'm sure they knew. I'm sure that they had talked to the Giants. Not sure if they would have talked to the Falcons or not or whatever. But I'm sure they had a general landscape for what was out there, but they were so high on Donovan Jackson that they just went up and took him. That's the context in which, so if Donovan Jackson doesn't work out, then you go, okay, this was a scouting error. less than a process error, right? Like you just had a bad eval on the guy. Go get your guys is fine process, at least to me. But as the video continues onward, there's this really stark contrast between how the video portrays the moments leading up to like taking Ty Felton or Tyrion Ingram Dawkins or taking Kobe King and Gavin Bartholomew. There's a lot more intentionality to the latter two, which tells me that like Kobe King is an interesting one. It seems like they're talking about Kobe King throughout all of day 3, and then they end up getting him at 201. So they must have really identified him as somebody who we like, who's good, that we're into, but is going to fall for whatever reason. And that sort of, we like this guy, but for whatever stupid reason, he's going to be value, is like his MO is trying to find like value plays by incurring moderate risks that are probably being overrated by overly cautious NFL teams. So I think maybe Kobe King falls in that range where for whatever reason he's just falling further, and the Vikings are super high on him, but understand that that's going to be, and I think that shows growth. I think the Vikings have been unreasonably high on players and then just took them thinking everybody would be unreasonably high on that guy and kind of whiffing on that, right? And like not, I want to say Asamoah was that. I'm struggling to come up with the names for who that was, but that has been a thing where they've been like really high on a guy and they picked him where they valued him rather than trying to eke out the, exact value there, but better on day 3. But then if you look back at like the Ty Felton and the Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, here's the thing about these videos, right? Again, they're not going to show anything that doesn't put the Vikings in a perfectly good light. To find that, you kind of have to ask what's missing. And so where was the, let's see if Ty Felton's still there. Where was the, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins is still there, right? And that doesn't mean they hate the guy. Like, they still drafted him, right? But most of that stuff, you're starting to talk about like Sam, like, oh, wait, what if we traded for Sam Howell and how that went down, which is actually pretty cool to watch how, like when Seattle takes Milroe, I think is when Kwesi turns to Kevin O'Connell and is like, Howell though, like, wait, hold on, like having the same kind of thought process. I think all of us were, where we go, it's another QB in Seattle. I wonder if one of those quarterbacks could end up in Minnesota because they got 5 now and they might be willing to dump one for cheap. And then when he makes that trade to Seattle, here's the other thing we can kind of learn about Kwesi. He is offered pick 179 straight up for 97 and 102. I put this into the trade calculator. It is slightly worse than the offer that Kwesi counters with, which is the one that ends up going through, which is 97 to 102, and then taking their 6th round pick and moving it up to the 5th, to the top of the 5th at 141. Taking, I think it was like 187 and moving it to 141. Very, very similar value, and depending on the trade chart, might not even like that might be genuinely identical, but it's a preference of taking a pick and moving it higher versus getting a full-on draft pick, but one that's a lot lower, right? I think that's really interesting and kind of surprising to me. We all grew up in a Rick Spielman world, more or less, unless you're a lot older than me. Maybe it's a Jim Finks world. But like, okay, from the last 20 years of a Rick Spielman world, the logic was that more bites at the apple was going to be good. It's a diversify your portfolio thing. And because that's the way that I always thought about it before Kwesi even got involved, when I heard, okay, Wall Street GM, I'm like, well, he's clearly going to want to maximize a bunch of picks and, diversify all of his assets. That's the thing. But in this particular case, and in a case where he's already low on number of picks in general, he still wanted to take the one that swapped 2 picks for 2 picks, that just moved one up a lot rather than taking on a whole one. So there's 2 different things that could mean about Kwesi. A, that whatever the trade chart that he made, that he uses, values pick slot in the 3rd round, or I'm sorry, in the 3rd day a lot higher than any of the conventional like public trade charts do, which is very much possible. Or that there is a cliff at a certain point in this class in particular that Kwesi didn't really care about like getting a bunch of, guys that aren't going to make the team anymore, right? Like there might have just been like a talent cliff there that he really, really cared about getting over rather than getting another one on the wrong end of that talent cliff. However, the latter there is harder for me to believe because when it's time to trade down with, was it the Colt? I forget who, to go to 201 and 202 to get the picks that ultimately become Kobe King and Gavin Bartholomew, then he kind of says, oh, for, we're going to trade 179 for 201 and 202. Oh, that's not so bad. Like he kind of is like dismissive of it. And then he thinks about it a little more and he actually does end up liking that idea. So that one is kind of the opposite, but it did like his instinct. He was instinctually against it and then brought it in. Maybe I'm reading way too far into like tone and inflection and stuff, but I find it really interesting to think about how Kwesi values those day 3 picks, how he views the difference between pick 141 and pick 202. That particular range where there was clearly some value to him in going up and over some cliff somewhere, some threshold somewhere. And then there's a lot of talk throughout about, okay, and then we got to get our tight end. And then we got it. So there was always this intention to draft a day 3 tight end. They talked about like a cluster of tight ends. So there were probably a lot of day 3 guys that they would have liked. They end up with Bartholomew. But this is an episode primarily about Donovan Jackson. And so I brought Locked On Buckeyes. Jay Stevens covered Donovan Jackson for years for that show. He's been doing that show forever. So he's going to come in and tell us about him next on Locked On Vikings. This episode is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Look, we all have experimented with organizational systems that didn't work, like piling a bunch of sticky notes or a reminders app that becomes so overwhelming that it just becomes a stressful thing you don't look at, that with a little badge that grows. You guys do that, right? How about Skylight Calendar? This is the way to do it. It's a sleek digital display that goes right on your desk, your counter, wherever you want it, and can sync with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, whatever you use, and make it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. So you can organize your life in a way that becomes part of your physical environment, and it does all of that stuff for you, especially if you're trying to organize a whole family and everyone's soccer practices or whatever. I mean, look, how often have you missed a plan because you got overwhelmed or accidentally double booked something because you didn't have a calendar right in front of you and you forgot that you already had a thing at that time? If you could see your whole week clearly on a 15-inch HD screen, wouldn't help with those problems. That is what Skylight is for. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off of their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off of your 15-inch calendar. That is skylightcal.com/NFL. All right, moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. I'm here with Jay Stevens, Locked On Buckeyes host. Frequent guest enough, I guess. Probably on like all the NFL shows. There's always so many Buckeyes around. What's up, Jay?
Welcome How you doing, Lucas? I'm doing well. A lot of Buckeyes have been drafted, 14 this year, way more than the past couple of years, and I'm glad to be back on the show with you.
Guess that's what you get with a natty. How do you feel about Donovan Jackson now protecting JJ McCarthy?
I wish you wouldn't have said that first. It makes me sick even thinking about that as you even say it. But JJ McCarthy, to me, I'm surprised what was he, a first-round pick? I thought that was stupid.
Top 10, maybe.
But maybe the Vikings see something in him that I didn't see. I thought he was a decent quarterback, good in college. I never saw the elite traits to make him a top 10 pick.
And you're allowed to say this as an Ohio State fan. Here's my theory on it. I think, so I loved him coming out. I loved him before the Vikings took him. And I've got a bunch of receipts on that. You can go back and watch all my pre-draft stuff from that year. But the way people would talk about him, so different if they were involved in the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry.
Oh, yeah.
Or in the Big Ten at all. Like if they were like somebody that covered Wisconsin, their opinion on JJ McCarthy sounds so different. than if you're just talking to somebody that like generally kind of watches, or somebody who like me who covers the NFL and only really dips into college for the draft, which is why I need help from guys like you. Donovan Jackson wasn't a name that I was familiar with at all until
Okay.
about February. Like that's just the way that I approach college, right? Like until you're a draft prospect, I'm not really going to pay attention to you. But you have covered Donovan Jackson for years. So first, let's kind of get the overall questions out of the way. Um, in Minnesota, Donovan Jackson almost certainly will not play tackle. If anything, he'll play out there for like 2 seconds while Christian Darrisaw is coming back from an injury. And it's like maybe he'll be ready for week 1 or maybe not. But like whenever he does come back, Donovan Jackson's going to play left guard, and I think they're just going to stick him at left guard and have somebody like Justin School or some backup take over if Christian Darrisaw is there. Do you think that is the right move with Donovan Jackson? Just stick him at left guard and never mess with it.
Yes, unless there is an injury. If there's an injury to the starting left tackle, I think you have to entertain the thought of not just sticking him at left guard, but maybe moving him to tackle because of what you saw at Ohio State this past year. I don't view him as a guy that, and this is different. Before the injury at Ohio State, I would have never thought, hey, put this guy at left tackle. I would have never would have crossed my mind. He never played left tackle previously. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, these guys go down. He's staying at left guard. You're trying to figure out the left tackle spot, not figuring out by bumping one of your better offensive linemen out to the left side and say, hey, go play on an island for the first time in your career. Oh, yeah, you're going up against Abdul Carter your first game. I wouldn't have thought that,
Yeah.
but
I
Ryan A
wanted to
figured
ask
it
you
out.
about that. Because like that gave people a lot of pause on like, wow, he went out to he gets absolutely cooked by and like Abdul Carter's Abdul Carter, but that's the kind of guy you hit in the NFL all the time.
Yes.
There's a lot of Abdul Carters in the NFL, not in this draft, but in the NFL generally, everybody's got someone, right? Aiden Hutchinson's in the division. We got to play him twice a year. So with like that really bugged a lot of people, I think, seeing that sort of meltdown against Penn State. Do you agree that it was as bad of a game as everybody says, and does it worry you at all, considering the context that he's probably not going to play tackle at all, unless necessity requires? Then all bets are off once guys start getting hurt.
The context I got to keep it in is it was his first time playing left tackle, and he got thrown in that spot and only had 2 weeks to prepare. So yeah, it was bad. Was it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that? But it didn't have much time. A week or 2 weeks. But like he didn't have much time to prepare. And when you're going up against that kind of athlete, you're going to get beat. I don't care if it's me, if it's you, if it's somebody. If you're doing something for the very first time, and the guy across from you is one of the best in the country, you're going to get beat. And that's what happened. He got beat. Okay. Now, going out the rest of the season, he didn't give up a sack at all. Going up against Tennessee's D-line, which is one of the better ones in the country. Going up against Oregon's D-line, one of the better ones in the country. Texas and against Notre Dame. All 4 of those teams have really good defensive linemen, really good guys on the edge. Didn't give up a sack. So I think the big turnaround was, okay, you got beat your first time playing left tackle, going up against one of the best guys in the country. I get that. That's expected. What wasn't expected was for him to not give up a sack the rest of the year. And I think that showed the growth, and also with Tuimoloau and Sawyer helping Donovan Jackson get those reps at left tackle. I think we saw him really be all in, buy into what he needed to do, and play great ball out there. I didn't expect him to do that at all. I thought it was going to be a move where out of necessity to move him, but then you regret it, and you're trying to look back and say, why is our recruiting issues coming up once again? But no, it became a strength for Ohio State at the end of the day.
That's pretty awesome. So forgetting the tackle experiment for a second, which was kind of the cool story of his season, but not the way that his NFL career is intended to play out, at least right now. You say, hey, he's one of your best linemen and you're kicking him out. What makes him one of the best linemen in Ohio State's line? Who is the best lineman in Ohio? Was it Josh Simmons? Is that the take?
At the time, yeah. Josh Simmons was the best offensive lineman. It was a
Do you think he
battle.
would have gone higher than Donovan Jackson if he didn't get hurt?
Oh, yeah. You're probably looking at a guy who would have been going top 15 if he didn't get hurt. But yeah, I think Josh Simmons was the consensus best offensive lineman. And then it's a competition between Seth McLaughlin or Donovan Jackson. I think positional need, guard gets drafted higher than center. and then also the injury from McLaughlin, which is why didn't get drafted. I think if he was healthy, he's probably an early day 3 pick, maybe late 3rd round. But I think Simmons was first, and he has a battle between Jackson and McLaughlin to see who the second best O lineman was for Ohio State.
I feel like Ohio State and I put Georgia in the category too of like, man, just get someone on that O-line. Like they'll be well coached, they'll be good to go. They're going to be like a 4-star, 5-star prospect because it's a blue blood school. What do you think it is about Ohio State that makes it that kind of program where like there's plenty of blue blood schools out there like Michigan, for example, that I would not say that about?
It's weird because it's not just a Ryan Day thing. Go back to Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel and throughout the history of the school, Ohio State's found ways to get really good offensive linemen to come there. It helps that some of them are in Ohio, so it helps that you got the recruiting state. You can recruit the state. You're going to get one of the better ones in the country. But all these coaches realize if you want to win, you got to have good offensive linemen. But Ohio State also has a history of having really good running backs. If you want to run the ball, you got to have really good offensive linemen. And from Day to Meyer to Tressel, even go back to John Cooper, they all realize it may be Day's the least of these when it comes to putting an emphasis on running the football. They all do that, and they all start with getting the offensive line correct and then figuring out everything else. Of course, the quarterback. You can't gloss over the quarterback in recruiting, but I think Ryan Day is a weird one because Ryan Day's offensive line was probably the best in his 6 full seasons at Ohio State a year ago. And that's with guys getting injured. It's just weird that Ryan Day's never had the elite offensive lineman year after year after year, which could be why the running game at Ohio State really hasn't been up to the standard that is what it should be in Columbus.
Yeah, well, and then last year happens. You get 2 running backs drafted. You get
Yeah.
a bunch of O-line drafted. So what is it about Donovan Jackson then that sets him out among this already high standard of Ohio State O-line? And then here's this guy who is like good for Ohio State.
Speaking of specifically left guard, his hand placement and just simply the pop on first hit, first contact is up there with some of the best in the country in the draft. You think about his footwork, where he had really good footwork at left tackle. He has better footwork at guard, and he's a great with the double teams. So you're not just getting a guy that is good with the first pop and good in space. He has the footwork and the double team nature to knock the defensive tackle off away from that gap to get to the second level, and he gets there very quickly. There's no missteps or there's no misguided effort where you're putting extra effort into the first man where you're whiffing on the guy at the second level. He does all those things very, very well. I think the lateral movement, and the quickness, that was one that got turned up to another level when he got out to left tackle, which at left guard, you're not going to need that lateral movement as much as you will,
No,
but
unless you're
also
like pulling.
correct. But that's the thing, though. He got to be a better puller this year, so that's where that little lateral movement and being able to be in space will help him. Not playing a left tackle in the NFL, that happens. Something's wrong in Minnesota if you got to pull that guy to left tackle. But I do think that the movement and the footwork at left tackle will help him when he's out in space pulling around the end.
It almost is like a proof of concept. I have a
Yeah.
whole bunch more I want to ask you about Donovan Jackson, and maybe other draft takes.
Okay,
I
let's do it.
had some wild opinions about Travion Henderson. All right, and I think you're gonna like him.
Gosh.
So let's
This will be fun.
let's keep this going in just a little bit. All right, keeping it going here with Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Jay, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the scheduling runaround we did.
Anytime, man. We'll make it work.
Thank you for your patience.
Yes.
So let's keep talking about Donovan Jackson. So there's a difference between a college and an NFL offensive lineman, right? And a lot of it is that in college, you might have your best game against like Bowling Green. It's like that's
Yeah.
not NFL players over there,
No.
right? And you don't get to play Bowling Green players in the NFL, right? Everybody is blue blood, and if it is the Bowling Green player, it's the greatest Bowling Green player in the history of Bowling Green. So on the inside, I want to kind of hone in on the inside. What do you think is the strongest matchup that Donovan Jackson had to deal with last year? or maybe even the year before, since just to open up the sample. And how did he do?
Let's stick with this year because I've been so stuck on the past 16 games they played. I kind of forgot about 2023.
I get that.
Yeah, yeah. I'll say 2023 on top of my head, it's easily Michigan. Easily. I don't have to even think that hard to say Michigan. You got Kenneth Grant and
Sure.
Mason Graham. Like, hello. Those are the two.
Yeah, for sure.
That's probably the
Was he
best
on the
duo in the
inside for
country.
that game?
What's that?
Was he on the inside,
Yeah.
or was that later? He was
No, he
still
was.
okay.
In 23, he was inside.
In 23.
20,
Okay.
20 for this past season, he was on the outside in that game. I think at guard, the biggest game was against Oregon. Easily. I forget the guy's name. He was
Derek
he
Harmon
transferred.
would
Thank you.
be the guy.
Derek
Yeah.
Harmon was a monster. Absolute monster that game. And McLaughlin at center, Jackson at guard. I think Shabola was at the other guard. It was just like a mistake at times this year. They didn't have an answer. Ohio State had absolutely no answer. I believe Quinshon Judkins got dinged up in that game because of Derek Harmon's physicality, just the whole defensive front. So in the best game at guard, it was a flop for the entire offensive line. I mean, Ohio State was very fortunate to only lose by 1 point because Oregon's front seven really did a great job of dominating the trenches and making everything really, really hard for Ohio State. The Buckeyes couldn't run the ball that game. I think they only had 2.1 yards a carry in the second half against Oregon. It wasn't just because of Oregon. It's because Ohio State just couldn't figure it out. They couldn't make the adjustments. They couldn't get the running backs to get into a groove. It was just an Ohio State issue. So his best opponent being Oregon at guard, it was probably his worst game of the year at guard.
Yeah, I centered a lot of my Donovan Jackson, and I was hugely high on him, but I centered a lot of it around that game. And I came away with an opposite take, actually, which is fascinating. And I'm coming in from a very outside, very no context perspective, right? But every time he hit Derek Harmon, it felt like Derek Harmon did the best things he did against either the center or stunting around on the other side or something like that. But there's a couple of plays that really informed me about that matchup in particular, because Derek Harmon wants to knife through a gap. He wants to get to the half a man and he is not set you up, do a move. That's not his game. And it's not really any D tackle's game. But rather it's like a spatial game with him. And so he would do a lot of big, hard head fake, hard jab step to one side, cross face, get to the other side. And that really revealed when he tried to do it with Donovan Jackson, I think Jackson had really great, and that was the game where Josh Simmons got hurt too, right?
It was.
So you had this backup tackle sometimes that was selling, right? But when he would cross that face, then you could see that the hip flexibility in particular and how he picked up stunts. It feels like Ohio State's just really good at stunts, at picking up stunts. But Donovan Jackson being able to just flip his whole 310-pound body over in a snap of the fingers was super impressive to me. And yeah, Derek Harmon got his dubs because he's a good player. But I don't know. I didn't see a concern, but would you highlight that as a concern or just, good player, they got their licks on each other?
Just good players that got the looks on each other. I wouldn't say it's a concern because up until that point in the season, just Ohio State hadn't played anybody close to Oregon at all. I don't think they played. I think their non-conference schedule last year was actually pretty weak, and so I think they had Iowa before the Oregon game, but Iowa wasn't really that good. They really had a Michigan State, but Michigan State was worse than Iowa, and so when he got into Big Ten play, it was good for him to get some of those true tests against guys at his same level. But it's different when you're going up against Oregon. He just hadn't got anywhere close to getting that preparation beforehand. And it was just one of them games where two good guys are going after it for 4 quarters. One guy's going to win some. One guy's going the other guy's going to lose some. You just kind of realize you can't win every rep.
For sure. Marshall and Western Michigan was the non-conference. And then, Michigan State and Iowa before that. So off the field, it seems like everybody really raves about Donovan Jackson. It's just this real good kid. Like it's pretty generic, and it's the kind of generic that you get when people talk about an offensive lineman. Like, oh yeah, he's good. Here's his like he's I guess a nice boy. Like, but can you tell me anything about what kind of like locker room presence we're getting?
Leadership. I think in the playoff in particular, when he was not only I think the longest tenured starter at that time, but also like the old man of the room when McLaughlin's gone, and then you didn't have Josh Simmons for the previous 6 games. Those other guys were Ryan Day and Justin Fry had to call up on Luke Montgomery to play in a backup role, rotating at guard. Austin Sarabia, Shabola, doing some different things there to kind of change up the mold and to get the guys to be as fresh as they can be for all 4 quarters. They're looking around to try to figure out who can I look to that's really, really good. And it was Donovan Jackson. Now, Josh Fryer, I think, was a 4 or 5 year Buckeye, so it's not like he wasn't also a multi year starter. Not like he's anything to just gloss over, but Donovan Jackson's clearly better. And his voice in that locker room, while he may be shy or quiet and things like that off the field, he was very bold, he was vocal, and he was the leader that those inexperienced guys can look to and say, hey, how can I get over this hump? What can you show me to help me in this matchup? And they trusted him wholeheartedly to get things done. And so I think for him, when it comes to this stuff like this, it's going to be one that, yeah, he's a rookie, so he's not going to have the biggest voice in the room. But years 3, 4, 5, and 6, assuming he stays in Minnesota that long, you're going to get him to be more of a vocal leader and a big time coach on the field, you may want to put it that way, to help the younger guys get up to speed with what it means to be an offensive lineman in the NFL.
It's an interesting situation in Minnesota because they've got 2 veteran tackles that are bookends that, with any luck, they're retiring Vikings. They got Brian O'Neill. He's going to turn 30s. There's going to be a contract thing soon, but he's sort of is the elder statesman of the line. You got Christian Darrisaw, all world, and then Ryan Kelly is the center right now. Again, another long time like NFL mainstay, but he's a temporary solution. He's older. He's a little hurt. They're probably going to want like a young center to come up right next to Donovan Jackson sometime. So that could come up, but it probably won't come up for a year or two. Okay. So I brought you here to talk about Donovan Jackson, but I got to be a little bit selfish. So I had a crazy take of Travion Henderson RB1 in this draft. Am I insane?
Yeah. RB1. What are you watching? RB1? Oh my goodness. What's going on here?
No. So here's my deal. There were 2 backs in this class, and I will preface this with there's somebody deeper in the class that I didn't catch. There are some guys that like went high that I didn't catch, but I watched like Gene T, I watched Caleb Johnson. I watched like the big names, both the Ohio State guys, Marion Hampton and stuff. I feel like this class was a million Najee Harrises. It was just a whole bunch of guys that, will get you a clean 4 yards really consistently, but they'll get hawked if they're running away. And that's like how I felt about like Judkins. I think also great back. Happy with him, and Hampton were my 2 favorite Najee Harrises, but they were Najee Harrises or Alexander Madisons, if you prefer, for Vikings fans. That are just, cloud of dust, steady eddies. But for a change your offense running back, I want explosiveness. And that's what I saw with Travion Henderson. It didn't bug me that like he was sort of a role player because they had a Najee Harris, they had Quinshon Judkins, who could be the, who could kind of be the one to take all the punishment. But every time Judkins touched the ball, or every time Henderson touched the ball, man, I was like, yo, 32 is kind of going crazy. I was like surprised to learn that 32 wasn't RB1 when I was watching, because I didn't know that context, which is kind of the funny quirks of like the way that I approach this is like, oh yeah, who's that like number 5 guy? It's like, dude, that guy won the Heisman. So I have these moments sometimes, but I was like, that's the guy I want on my team. He goes in like 3rd round, but he was my guy.
Oh gosh, no. Okay, so this is going to sound weird, and Vikings fans that maybe tapping and Locked on Buckeyes, maybe you've heard this. I was not the biggest Henderson fan.
Oh, you did? Oh no.
Up until this year, I kind of tried to push myself over the edge and try to give him more of his praise because he's a good back. Don't get me wrong; like he's solid. He's a really good pass protecting back, which I think he excelled at this year in a way that nobody expected. He was better between the tackles this year than he had ever been at Ohio State. So he got better. And I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but you got better vision because at one point he couldn't see anything on the field. He was only good if he put his one foot in the ground and then got upfield, hit that gear nobody else could catch up to. And so, like, I had a hard time with him because me as an Ohio State guy, he didn't fit the mold of a normal Ohio State running back. He was more of a Urban Meyer H-back or new age slot receiver. If you're able to move like a slot receiver that moves around a little bit and motions into the backfield and does some stuff that way, that's Travion Henderson. He's not your traditional running back. And so I had a hard time buying into him when I want you to be able to hit the B gap, let me get 6 yards. Hit the A gap, let me get 3 yards on when I need those tough yards. That's not him. That's not him at all. And so you would say RB1. I would never, just personally, be able to get my head around that RB1 for him. Good running back. Really, really good running back. One issue I can't go RB1 is not anything that he did as far as being productive this year. His best years at Ohio State was when he had a great running mate in Quinshon Judkins. I'm worried about his durability because if he's a featured back, you're almost guaranteed for him to miss 3, maybe 4 games at least because his body isn't durable. Freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, he had injuries in every single year. One of the years, I believe his sophomore year, he missed a Cotton Bowl because he had to either play hurt or decide to get surgery in December and then miss the bowl game. And he decided to get the surgery and miss the bowl game. I don't trust him in a 17-game season if he's the featured back to play all 17 games. I can't do that. I personally can't, which is one reason why I can't make him RB. I couldn't have made him RB1 because I value durability and I value a player being able to play all the games. There are other guys in the draft that could and that can. He can't when he's the featured back.
I could go like super deep into this for like 3 more hours, but I'll let you have the last word there. Jay, thank you so much. If you want to listen to Jay, if you're a Buckeyes fan, or if you're maybe somebody who hates the Buckeyes, want to listen, we take those. So go check out Locked On Buckeyes. Jay Stevens, thank you so much for your time.
It was fun being back on here, and maybe about 12 months we'll do it again when the Minnesota Vikings do something smart.
There's always one.
Draft the Buckeye.
Yeah, probably. Thanks, Jay. Tomorrow is Town Hall Tuesday. Get your questions in the Google form linked in the show notes description to any podcast episode. I will see you guys all for that tomorrow. And as always, Skull.